Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Ho, ho, ho! This is the special holiday edition of Compass Points, the podcast where every week we talk about Knoxville news, events, controversies, politics, government, anything that gets our attention. I'm Jesse Mayshark, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass at CompassKnox.com, and I am joined by Scott Barker, co-publisher and co-founder of Compass. How are you doing today, Scott?
Humbug!
This episode is going to be actually released on Christmas. We're taping it on Friday, we should say, but we wish Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to all of our listeners.
Absolutely. And I have a reputation of being a Scrooge-like character, but I'm a real
you're so jolly.
I'm a softie inside. So
it is cold, huh? Holy cow!
It is terrible.
I'm not only wearing this overcoat for sort of like seasonal Bob Cratchit effect. We're taping down here at Barbarian Studios, where, like many properties today on Friday across the county, had a temporary power outage for a while, so the place is still getting a little warmed up. How are you staying warm?
Well, so far so good. Knock on wood. We haven't had a power outage at our house yet.
We had one at my house right before I was leaving to come here and do the taping. I'm hoping it'll be back on by the time I get home.
I'm fully anticipating that we will have one. We had cable issues and internet issues, but so far so good as far as the power goes. But I've got we've got blankets and coats and everything else, and if worse comes to worse, I hear there's some hotels around here too. So
yeah. Lots of options, hopefully, for everybody to stay warm, and we hope everybody is having a warm and merry day. Before we start into our weekly news roundup, we thought we would do a little bit of seasonal festivities here. First of all, we have some eggnog. I got Pennsylvania Dutch eggnog. I can't exactly say I recommend it. It was pretty cheap. So it's made, it says, with real dairy cream, rum, brandy, and blended whiskey. It's fine.
Yeah, well,
it warms the innards a little bit.
And that wasn't a sponsored.
No, we're not. Sadly, we're not getting paid by Pennsylvania Dutch. I had to actually buy the bottle. Although we are open to in-kind or cash liquor sponsors if anybody's interested.
Or sponsors of any other kind.
That is true. And we thought that we would talk a little bit. We talked about this at the end of last week's episode, and I challenged all of us, including Seth Barber, our producer. Seth, love the jolly hat there. We're going to talk about what is our favorite version, our favorite film or other adaptation of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, and what are our favorite holiday songs. So, Seth, what have you got for us?
Well, as I mentioned last week, I still think Scrooge is my favorite version of A Christmas Carol.
Scrooge, the Bill Murray.
The Bill Murray one is because it's a Christmas Carol film about making a Christmas Carol film at the same time, and just it was really well written in and of itself, and it's Bill Murray, which
and it's very funny.
Can't really go wrong with most things Bill Murray puts his hands on. And I've been thinking about the Christmas Carol one, the actual song that's my favorite. Carol of the Bells is probably one of my favorite, like just traditional whatever. Don't know if that counts as a Christmas Carol.
Sure.
It's not one that you get. Because my issue is with the day job, I'm in grocery stores all the time, so I've been getting bombarded with Christmas music since
You've had enough Mariah Carey,
at least Black Friday. It's been hours and hours a day, and so Carol of the Bells is probably my favorite in the category. I do go in the grocery store, and I think a lot when I hear Santa Baby about how right on the edge of a little bit questionable that song might be in what the intent is and kind of stuff like that, because she sounds a little thirsty in the way that song is presented. So
I mean,
those
she's
are kind of
basically
my
looking for a sugar daddy in
right.
that song. Like, let's be clear.
And it's a again, I'm not disparaging the song at all. It's just in thinking about it, it's like, that's one of those, because what was a couple years ago, what was the other one that got in trouble, got a little bit Me Too?
Baby, it's cold outside. Yeah.
And so maybe Santa Baby needs a Me Too moment of its own. So
right.
Anyway, that's where I'm at on the two selections required.
How about you, Scott?
Well, I'm a traditionalist kind of guy, and I'm afflicted with nostalgia. One of the things was when I grew up in a very religious household, and so I kind of gravitate toward the. I'm starting with the holiday song before, but I gravitate toward the older, more religious Christmas carols. O Come, Emmanuel's one. The Silent Night, all those kind of classic ones.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of most modern Christmas songs, or contemporary Christmas songs, I should say. As far as the Christmas Carol goes, while Bill Murray's is great, I go back to the version, I believe it came out in the late 70s or early 80s, with George C. Scott playing Scrooge. And one of the reasons that I'm really fond of that is George C. Scott was one of my favorite actors. He's two of my favorite movies, Dr. Strangelove, classic turn in it, and then he was in the first movie I ever saw in a movie theater, and that was Patton. Of all things,
iconic performance.
Yeah, both of those were great performances. And while I don't think that this is on par with those, that's I've got a soft spot in my heart for.
He's pretty convincingly grumpy in that. My only issue with that movie is that he's so good at being grumpy, but at the end where he has to make that turn to suddenly being filled with love and joy, I'm not sure I totally bought it.
Yeah.
He still seemed like he's probably a pretty grumpy guy. Well,
maybe that's why I like him so much.
So my favorite version of A Christmas Carol, and there's lots of them that I enjoy. I like the Muppet Christmas Carol, for example. But the one that I remember seeing first as a kid on my parents' very small black and white TV that we had at the time was a black and white version of it. I think 1951 British film version of A Christmas Carol with Alistair Sim playing Scrooge, who to me is just kind of will always be the iconic Scrooge, because that's the first one that I saw and that I knew. And that movie, especially the part at the end where the Ghost of Christmas Future comes and he's all in black robe and kind of shows Scrooge how everybody's going to be happy when he dies, and he takes him to his gravestone. It scared me.
Yeah. Oh,
whoa.
That's a great one too. That's the first one I remember as well. But that's a fantastic version.
And then I'm going to cheat a little bit. It'll surprise you on the music, because I listen to a lot of music. I love lots of music, so I could name any number, and I do like a lot of Christmas music, both traditional and more recent. So I'm going to name one of each of those. On the traditional front, the song "O Holy Night," first of all, I think has a beautiful melody. It also has a really interesting history, which periodically gets brought up again around Christmas time to remind people. It was actually originally written as an abolitionist hymn in the 19th century, and there is a last verse of it that basically nobody ever sings anymore, but that is a very explicitly anti-slavery verse, and this was written before the Civil War as part of the American abolitionist movement, which had a very strong religious underpinnings. And the verse is all about how basically the Lord is going to break the bonds of slavery and so forth. So, A, I think it's a beautiful song. B, it has an interesting history. My favorite version of it is sung by Dennis Day, who some people may remember He was a popular singer, early, mid 20th century, 40s and 50s, really. He was on Jack Benny's show, among other things, kind of did featured spots. And my parents had a Dennis Day Christmas album, which has just a gorgeous version of Oh Holy Night on it. He's got that kind of classic Irish tenor. He was an Irish American, but that kind of Irish tenor, high, clear voice. Really nice. Contemporary song, there's a band called Low, which just performed at Big Ears this past year, put on a great performance. And sadly, one of their two founding members, Mimi Parker, who was the singer and percussionist for the band, just died of cancer not too long ago. And they put out a Christmas EP 20 years ago or so. Some of it is them doing, I think they do Little Drummer Boy and some things like that, but it's also some of their own originals. There's a great song on there called Just Like Christmas. So if you haven't heard that song, go to Spotify or wherever else and check it out. Just Like Christmas by Low. It's a really pretty little song.
One thing you just mentioned, a song that I thought about and was thinking about bringing up, and now I will, probably much to my chagrin. But in keeping with my curmudgeonly persona, Christmas song I hate the most is Little Drummer Boy.
Yeah,
I cannot stand
it's
Little Drummer Boy.
I mean, the thing that I always think with that song is like, you've just given birth. You're in a barn, basically. It's probably pretty cold. And like, here's this kid coming up and playing drums in your ear. It's like, maybe the intent is good, but I'm not sure that that's exactly what that moment calls for. Yeah, it's although I will say, Low also does do a very nice version of that song. So
I'm sure that there are nice versions of the song. I haven't heard Low's version, but just in general, that's one that if it comes on, if I'm driving down the road and it comes on the radio, I usually turn it off.
Understandable. It is
4 minutes.
It can be kind of an annoying song. I agree. All right. And also Seth has provided us with a couple of his family's homemade Christmas cookies here, which we will be sampling over the course of the episode. So thank you for that, Seth. This is really full service podcast.
Right. And for the listeners, they get to hear you chew, which I'm sure is on everybody's Christmas list.
I'll try to do that the side of my mouth that's not close to the microphone. All right. Well, ho, ho, ho. We do have actual local news and events to talk about this week. Even the week leading up to Christmas, there were some things that happened. We will be talking about what is maybe the biggest story of the week, which was some outrage and protests over a drag queen show at the Tennessee Theater. We will be talking a little bit about some changes in the City of Knoxville planning and development services. News on sort of two different fronts there. And I thought that we could start off by talking about this past Monday's Knox County Commission meeting. There was not a whole lot of controversial stuff on the agenda itself. Last week we talked about these amendments to the county's ambulance contract with American Medical Response. They did approve that, so that contract has now been essentially extended through January of 2024, and in the meantime, the county is going to completely rebid that ambulance contract this coming year for the first time in 10 years, and we will probably be talking about that a lot in 2023 because I feel like every time this ambulance contract comes up for a bid, it's always a bit of a political fight. There are a couple of ambulance companies that tend to contend for it. They hire their own lobbyists. It becomes kind of a big deal. So we probably will be talking about that in 2023. But for now, what happened at Commission was they just essentially extended the contract through 2024 and made some adjustments to those late penalty structures that we talked about last week that can cost AMR a lot of money if they don't have the resources to respond in time to calls. But really the most significant or certainly dramatic thing that happened at that meeting, it was a very lively public forum. Part of that had to do with outrage over the drag show, which we will be talking about in a couple of minutes. But the other part of it was people who came really at the encouragement and behest of County Commissioner Daisha Lundy, who represents the 1st District, to speak about the incident that happened last month, which we've talked about on the show, where some Knox County Sheriff's Office deputies went to a McAllister's Deli location on Shad Road and said that they were refused service and left, and it got turned into kind of a big deal by the Sheriff's Office Communications Director, Kimberly Glenn, put it out on Facebook that they had been refused service, and it became kind of a mini outrage there for a couple of days. It turned out that the 15-year-old girl who was at the center of this, who the deputies said declined to serve them, she said she didn't, that she had just turned away from the register to finish up some things at the end of her shift and had asked another cashier to step up. Everybody basically seems to agree that, yes, there was another cashier there immediately to take the order. So it's not that there was not somebody to take the order. That seems pretty clear. In any case, the deputies were upset that the one girl, in their perception, had not wanted to serve them. In their perception, because they were police officers, it's not clear that she actually said anything explicit to that. Yeah. She says she didn't. Her coworkers say she didn't. But anyway, she turned out to be a girl named Aniya Thompson. And we haven't named her before in our coverage of this, but she actually came to County Commission this week, stood up and spoke at public forum. And so, when somebody has kind of entered the public realm at that level, I think it's okay to go ahead and use her name. She was very straightforward about this is who I am and here's what I experienced. The interesting thing about her, of course, is that she is the younger sister of Anthony Thompson Jr., the Austin East High School student who was killed in an encounter with Knoxville police in a bathroom at Austin East in April 2021, which I'm sure people remember. It was a big deal and it generated a lot of protests and so forth. And, she, among the things that she said to commission, the questions that she asked was this because of who I am? Was this because of my brother? Now, we should say that there is no evidence of that. It's not, there's no reason to think that the officers going in there had any idea at all who she was. It's one of those coincidences that happen. But her main point in speaking was that she felt like she had been really mistreated by the sheriff's office, that, she said, I was just doing my job. Yes, I turned away from the cash register, but there was somebody else there immediately to take their order. And she ended up getting fired as a result of this, which McAllister's said was because she was 15. Now, she said she put her birth date and age and everything on her job application, and nobody ever said anything about it. So, and of course, we know that restaurants have been having a hard time filling positions anyway. Do we believe that McAllister's actually didn't know she was 15, or is McAllister's kind of using that as a way to try to defuse the situation? We have no way to know that, but the end result of it was she had a job. She's a high school student. She was working, and she lost her job. And so I think she's looking for another job now. But, she felt like the sheriff's office, and she called out Kimberly Glenn specifically and personally, had really done her and the store and the private business a disservice by just going out on public media and social media and kind of saying this before there had been any attempt by the sheriff's office to talk to the store to find out what happened. They just kind of took the report from the officers and immediately put it on Facebook and generated, she said that night they immediately started getting angry phone calls. People are yelling at them, telling them they're never going to shop there and all sorts of things. And, her perception was that it really kind of created an unsafe work environment, not just for her, but for everybody at the store, because it kind of put a bit of a bullseye on them for anybody who, would be upset that a business was declining to serve law enforcement officers. And County Commissioner Daisha Lundy actually walked up and stood beside her while she was at the podium, which is something you don't see happen a lot during a public forum. But she kind of wanted to show her support. And then there were several other speakers, some of them people who are engaged in sort of social justice movements and Black Lives Matter and so forth here in Knoxville, who also spoke and, kind of raised objections to the sheriff's office handling of it, and also endorsed an idea that Lundy has floated that the sheriff's office maybe needs a civilian oversight body like the one that the Knoxville Police Department has. And Lundy has said that she would support that nobody else on county commission has really made any statements about that. And it was interesting, after the public forum was over and everybody who was there to speak on this issue had spoken, Lundy gave a very emotional, like really one of the most emotional kind of public statements I have seen somebody give on county commission or city council there in the main assembly room, where, you know, she just said that she's frustrated, that she feels like she is the only black member of county commission. She represents the county's only majority minority district, and she feels like it's hard for her to get attention to the things that she thinks are particularly important to the people who she represents. And she kind of cited a couple of incidents that have happened at, or issues that have come before county commission, where she's kind of felt like she's out there on her own. But she said that, you know, she's not going to let this issue of the broader issue of police accountability with the sheriff's office go. And she's considering various options, proposals that she could bring. You know, whether or not there's really going to be support on county commission to do anything, much less something like establish a civilian review board, you know, that is hard to say. I think there's still a fairly strong contingent of people on county commission who tend to be very supportive of law enforcement in general, tend to be very supportive of the sheriff's office. The sheriff's office has not made any statement about this idea, but in general, law enforcement agencies are not super receptive to these kinds of things.
Well, and sheriff's departments in general too, because the sheriff is an elected position, unlike the police chief of the city of Knoxville.
Right.
They're fond of saying that they have oversight. It's the voters. Every
Right.
4 years, there's a referendum on them.
Yeah.
And so there's always good. Law enforcement always has resistance to civilian oversight. At least at first, they might come to accept it, but if they had their druthers, they wouldn't have any civilian oversight. And second, I mean, how would that be set up? Because the
Right.
sheriff's office is an independent office.
Yep.
And so
Even county commission can't tell the sheriff's office what to do,
No.
much less any citizen.
yeah. So
Review
there's some
Except for, we should mention, the Sheriff's Merit System Council, which does have authority specifically having to do with the treatment of employees at the sheriff's office, but it doesn't have anything to say about their engagement with citizens.
Well, I'm sure there is a way to set it up, but it's not as simple as just county commission saying, waving a wand and saying we've got an oversight board.
Right.
But and then again, if history is a guide, the sheriff's office would fight that kind of tooth and nail.
Yeah, I would think so too. And it does, like, I think that that argument that, well, there is accountability to the voters, I mean, that is true. On the other hand, if your particular concern, which is the case with Lundy, is for the treatment of minority populations in particular, well, they are minority populations. Yeah. And so, how much say I forget what the black population of Knox County countywide is, about 9% or so. Like, that's a very small percentage of the population. And so how much say do they have in the operation of the sheriff's department? But that is where the argument would come for, well, to kind of guard against these things, you need this. But it certainly couldn't happen without support of a majority of county commission. And as you say, even with a majority of county commission, how much authority it could have, what it could actually do, all that would be complicated to work out. So Lundy did say she's going to continue to work on this. She may come back with some proposals. We'll see what happens and certainly report on it if she does. But, it was a very striking moment. This, and I should say, and you can go and watch the video, Aniya Thompson was seemed very self-confident, way more self-confident than lots of people who come to speak at public forum. Kind of, I would say, stood her ground in her feelings about the situation. And the sheriff's office had no comment on any of this at all. They really haven't said anything about it since they made statements the day after it happened. And ever since then, as sort of more details have come out and more questions have come out about it, they have just kind of declined to comment further. So now let's turn to the city development services. And there was a report that recently came out from an advisory group. What's going on there?
Yeah, Matrix Consulting Services. They're out of California. What, back up a little bit, for years, decades, developers, contractors, everybody who has to build anything in the city of Knoxville has complained that the city of Knoxville makes it difficult. It's inefficient. They get conflicting guidance. All kinds of they think they're done, and all of a sudden they've got another permit to get or another inspection to go through and things like that. It's it's a very difficult thing to do. So much so that some developers don't even bother developing in the city.
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't just developers. This is, anybody. Because as a homeowner, if you wanted to add a deck onto the back of your house, you'd have to go get a permit for it.
Mm-hmm.
And where do you start? And that sort of thing.
Or people opening a small business and
Right.
trying to get their space built out and all of that.
Yes. So it affects just about anybody who wants to build anything.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that Mayor Kincannon, when she ran for office, said that she was going to convene a developers roundtable to look at streamlining city services. So, of course, they had the pandemic, which kind of slowed that down, like it slowed down lots of stuff. But then they hired a consultant, and they worked with the roundtable and other people who've used development services too. They went through a couple thousand customers who, as they call them, they always call the constituents customers when you deal with development stuff. And the report that came out is comprehensive, to say the least. It's 158 pages or so. It's got 74 recommendations for completely revamping the way the city does their work, and it covers, very small things. One of the suggestions that they had, recommendations they had, was, make sure that somebody is manning the front counter at the development services office,
Mm-hmm.
because you do go there and there is no one there. In fact, I was there just the other day and there was no one there. It goes from there to all kinds of, they cover all kinds of ground, the internal stuff, the external stuff, potential ordinance changes, potential charter changes as well, because they talk about, they kind of endorse the idea of a separate city and county, or at least a separate city planning commission,
Mm-hmm.
planning commission staff, which would actually take state action to do the commission itself. But one of the overarching thing is to make it more customer friendly. And in order to do that, they first have to take care of their internal stuff, because that's where things back up. They have their various offices and agencies involved in this. There's the plans and inspections office of the city. There's Knox County Planning. There's the fire marshal's office. There's the city engineering department. All these entities, and they don't communicate very well together. They haven't historically, and then even within those departments, you go to deal with one person in a department, and they'll tell you one thing, and then you go back 3 days later to talk to that person. They're gone. Get somebody else. They tell you something completely different.
Mm-hmm.
So what they're going to do is they're going to standardize a lot of that. Go through customer service training. They're getting new software anyway. One of the issues is that the staff at Knox County Planning doesn't have access to the city's software.
Uh-huh.
Just things like that to try to make the internal communications better, so they're not siloed so much, and then it goes to the outward public-facing part. One of the things that they're going to do, they want to do, is hire a development director Harold Cannon calls the concierge, is a person whose job it is to kind of shepherd people through the process, especially those who are new to it, where you go to this person and they basically hold your hand and tell you everything you're going to do. They're going to do redo the website to make it more less confusing, not more anything, less confusing. Because you go there now, it's very confusing to figure out what to do. And they want to do all these things. Now, granted, this is a consultant's report. I did an extensive interview with Cannon, and he said that we're going to do what we can do. It doesn't mean we're doing everything. We probably won't do everything, but they are going to get started and get, hopefully, to them, they're hoping to get of the 74 recommendations. They're hoping to implement 50 or more by the end of 2023.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a pretty aggressive schedule. I mean, and they're doing things like reviewing subdivision regulations, reviewing, the hillside protection regulations. A lot of it is not the regulations themselves, but how do we go through the approval process for these things? And, the goal, of course, is to make it as easy as possible for someone to meet the technical requirements of building in the city. It's not necessarily to make it easier for developers to just run amok. It's to streamline the approval process of all these regulations that are inside the city limits.
Mm-hmm. Well, and when you talk about these kinds of things, of course, there are going to be people who say, why should we make things easier for developers? Because there are people out there who are skeptical of developers' willingness to abide by existing regulations, to take into consideration the concerns of the surrounding community. Often, neighborhood groups and homeowners associations and so forth can have a lot of concerns, and they are the ones who are often most concerned about making sure that all the rules and regulations are followed. And so this kind of talk, when people start talking about streamlining, making things more efficient, because there's been this talk on the county side as well, can make people nervous who think that already there's kind of not enough checks on developers. And, to be fair, probably everybody who goes through these processes would prefer them to be easier, just because you'd like things to be easier. If you're a developer, you'd kind of prefer to just be able to do kind of what you want as quickly and easily as possible. But I will say, I worked at the city for several years, and these issues came up a lot then. There were some efforts to try to address them at that point as well. And you do hear the same things kind of over and over again. You hear it from developers. You do also hear it from people who are trying to open businesses. And it is these kind of constant anecdotal reports of inconsistencies where one inspector comes out one week and says to do this, and then another one comes the next week and says, why did you do that? Or, says, oh no, you also have to do this, which the prior inspector told you was fine. So you hear these things enough, and I know people who work at the city hear them enough, and you think, well, there probably are some things they can do to at least make it more transparent, make it more predictable, so that as people engage at the front end, they have some realistic idea of what they're actually looking at. And, if it's really going to be a 3-month process, it's better to know that than to kind of think it's going to be a 6-week process and then find out, oh no, actually, we're going to have to do all this stuff too. So,
right. In fact, some of the a couple of the recommendations are about deadlines and for because right now it's kind of a standard thing, no matter what the inspection is for, and the different inspectors who have to go out and have different workloads and all. And again, this is, and you hear developers say this, so they want to have clear expectations. They say that they will do whatever they need to do as long as it's clear and understandable and consistent. And that's one of the goals of this thing. And then some of these things aren't really necessarily developer things, but they're processes and that are kind of puzzling. One of the ones that they recommend changing is that when you want to close out the right of way. And the city has a lot of these streets where the street will go through its last intersection and continue on and then end, like at the edge of a park or something like that. Well, they don't need that right of way, and the adjacent property owners sometimes will ask for that. They have to go to Planning Commission to get it approved, and then City Council to get it approved. And the consultant was like, "Why do you do that? Why cut out the Planning Commission because City Council is the ultimate authority,
right? And
so just cut out Planning Commission." And those things are generally not very controversial, although sometimes they can be. But that's kind of one of the examples of things that, and like I said, this is a very comprehensive report. The recommendations large and small, and so we will. The city is basically starting now. Has already started a little bit of this. In the coming weeks, I mean, the first few weeks, first couple of months, is basically going to be setting up these things. They're going to this developers roundtable that gave so much input. They're going to keep an executive committee of that roundtable together to make it an ongoing dialogue with them. They're going to start. One thing that they're going to do to improve their internal communications is they're going to have a committee of representatives of each of the agencies and offices that are involved in the process who will meet regularly to discuss how to better do things. And they're going to put that together first, kind of lay the foundation, and then they're going to look at making more substantial changes.
Well, and I imagine that we probably will hear input, whether invited or not, from citizen groups, neighborhood associations, people like that, who are always concerned about development processes, and I'm sure will have their own ideas about some of these things.
And one thing, this is like I said, they're not going to do everything in the report, all the recommendations, but the report itself is very dense, very hard to get your arms around. Quite frankly, I thought it could have been organized a little better so you could understand it a little better.
The report about streamlining needed to be streamlined.
Yeah. So I mean, there are, and most of the people, I mean, talk to a couple of developers, talk to a couple of council members, and they've all been briefed on the report, and they basically, the kind of overriding theme is. I talked to them 2 weeks after the report came out, or a week after the report came out, and they're still trying to get their arms wrapped around it.
Yeah.
They're still trying to unpack what's in there. So it's going to take a while, and so I will caution anyone who is getting ready to dive into this. Be willing to spend a few hours.
Where can you find this report?
It's on the city's website. That's knoxvilletn.gov.
Right. Well, and so there was another interesting development at the city in terms of their planning processes and personnel this week. And this is one of those things that's, maybe a bit of inside baseball, maybe more interesting to people inside the city county building than outside, but was still pretty interesting. And what was that?
Okay. Well, we'll go back to Knox County Planning for being in 2021 for about 17 months. Amy Brooks was the executive director of Knox County Planning. She has a master's from University of Michigan in planning, and she spent her entire career in planning. And she was the executive committee or director of the planning staff, and so, but earlier this year, she moved over to the city. She resigned her position as executive director of planning, and then to become the chief housing officer, the office that deals with housing, the U.S. Housing and Urban Development grant funding, the city's affordable housing funds, those things, which isn't exactly planning, so it's not really in her wheelhouse there, but she took that over, and then it came out that the city and the county we're going to split the planning staffs.
Right. Which we talked about.
We talked about that before. So to not be too redundant, then Mayor Kincannon kind of tried to create a new position in her office of a planning director to oversee the city's part of that and to create a new department. She did not tell council members that. They were pretty upset about being left out of the loop, so they didn't fund it, didn't approve it.
Because it was a budget amendment, since it wasn't in the.
And when all that was going on, you kind of went, okay, so now Amy Brooks is already in the city. She's got a planning background, not an affordable housing background. It's just so logical that she would go fill that position. But when the position didn't get filled,
and they didn't say that explicitly, right? That she was going to fill it, but
no, they didn't. But they certainly didn't, and they haven't addressed it to this day. But it would, it's the way that the timelines worked out.
Right. Yes. There was a lot of logic.
Raises questions because as said, the city's doing this. The county is already moving forward with creating its planning department.
Right.
And they advertised for an executive director or a senior director for its department. And Brooks resigned her job with the city last week or 2 weeks ago, and is going to move over to the Knox County Planning Office to run it at the first of the year.
At a little bit of a pay cut, even, right?
She's taking a little bit of a pay cut, not a huge pay cut. Her salary with the city's $155,000 a year. It's going to be a little bit over $150,000 a year with the county. I mean, it's more than $4,000. I wouldn't want to take a $4,000 pay cut, but as a percentage of her income, it's it's doable. But this will. And one of the things that came out, her resignation letter didn't give a reason. It was a very brief one, but it didn't give a reason. And Mayor Kincannon, in her she issued a statement and said it took her by surprise. So apparently the whatever went on, that's the case. The thing about it is Amy Brooks is still being planning just with the county instead of the city.
Well, and you asked the city whether there was a connection between the failure of that position to get funded and her leaving, and they basically didn't answer the question.
They basically would not answer the question.
Right.
Yeah.
And,
county. And I couldn't get a hold of Amy Brooks. I did try to get a hold of Amy Brooks.
Sure.
This happened just at the end of the week, and city offices are closed today, which is Friday. I was trying to get a hold of her on Thursday and could not.
She'd probably be just as happy for us not to be talking about this at all.
I doubt very seriously she would have called me back.
Yeah. And we like Amy. We've dealt with Amy a lot. She is a planner. She's not somebody who I think is looking to be on anybody's front page or anything.
Yeah. She does not. She does not relish the spotlight.
Right. Well, and the folks at the county were at some pains to make clear that they did not poach her. They say they did not go out and try to recruit her from the city. It was more a sort of their interests were aligned.
In fact, they sent me a copy of the job posting that they had put out before this happened. So to let me know that, okay, we were already looking for somebody,
And these things happen. People do go back and forth between city and county administrations because, both of those administrations have some operations in common. And so if somebody works at County Parks and Rec and they're looking for a new job, City Parks and Rec is one place to look, or vice versa. What made this interesting was just kind of this whole cascading series of changes having to do with how planning is going to be organized. And then also the fact that she was only at the city for a few months, really.
Yeah, she was less than 4 months.
Right, yeah. So interesting stuff. But so now the county does have a new planning director.
The county is going to get, they're going to have their own planning department way earlier than the city is. They're a different process. The city council has to create a department. They have to staff the department, which means the budget for next fiscal year, not this one. Right. So it was always going to take longer. because it just does under the city charter. So.
All right. Well, that is interesting and substantive. Unlike the next thing we're going to talk about, which is interesting, I don't know how substantive it is. But we are talking about drag queens, and specifically we are talking about a drag show that happened at the Tennessee Theater just this past Thursday. It was called A Drag Queen Christmas. It is a seasonal touring review. It's toured all over the country. This was not even its first performance in Tennessee. The exact same show was in Nashville on November 27th.
And this is the 8th year it's been
This is the 8th year.
In the Tennessee Theater.
Well, no, it's only the second year it's been at the Tennessee Theater.
Oh, okay.
It's the 8th year that the tour has been running.
Okay,
They've been running a
excuse me, I
nationwide
misunderstood.
tour for 8 years. And this is the second year in a row that it's been at the Tennessee. I don't think it was here prior to that or prior to the pandemic. But anyway, it was here in 2021, and it was a sold-out show, and there was zero controversy about it at all. Becky Hancock, who's the executive director of the Tennessee Theater, said after the show they got zero negative feedback. It was a sold-out show. People came to it. They liked it. Nobody complained about it. But one thing that has happened this year is that drag queens and drag shows and drag performances have become a big sort of culture war issue. And it's been bubbling up for a while, but it really took off this year. And this is one of these things that you can actually trace. I mean, you can go back and do searches for headlines and things like that, and you will see that kind of starting in 2021 and heading into 2022, issues around gender identity, lots of issues around sort of transgender. We've talked about like these proposed bills about limiting transgender treatment for underage people and so forth. Those became big issues in 2022. You'll find a lot of people saying that these were issues that particularly Republicans were hoping to kind of use as culture wedge issues ahead of the midterm elections. But drag shows and drag queens got dragged into this discussion as well. And there have been stories on Fox News and various other kind of conservative outlets, as well as sort of influential social media accounts like Libs of TikTok, which is a very anti-LGBTQ social media account that is very popular and has had really a pretty big impact on the issue, at least from the kind of conservative side of the political equation. Kind of raising concerns about children, particularly about children going to drag shows. And, this arises out of growing visibility and popularity of drag performances as mainstream entertainment. Of course, drag performances go back a long way. It's an old art form. The word drag itself to describe a female impersonator performance goes back to the late 1800s. So it's been around for a long time. It really grew up within gay culture in the United States. And if you've seen drag shows, as I have, there's a good chance that the first drag show, at least, that you ever saw was at a gay club. Certainly the first drag shows I saw were at gay clubs. And, it's a form of entertainment. It's people wearing costumes, sometimes lip syncing, sometimes singing, often dancing. There's often comedy as part of it. They certainly can be raunchy, no question about it. I think some of the discussion about it has made it seem like these are sexual performances in a way that they're not exactly. I mean, I see people compare them to like striptease performances, but strip performances are done primarily for the purpose of, sexual excitation. Yeah. That's what they're doing. They're trying to kind of get you excited. Drag shows are not that. Drag shows, people don't get, I guess some people may get turned on watching a drag show. People get turned on by all kinds of things. But drag shows are not there explicitly. They're there to entertain. Yeah. And like I said, they are often funny. They can be raunchy. They don't have to be. So there's been this kind of cottage industry of like family-friendly drag shows. There's drag brunches, which we have some here in Knoxville. They have them at the Mill and Mine, which are open to all ages, where, drag queens will perform. There's also these drag story hours, which we don't have in Knoxville that I'm aware of, but in some, sort of like more liberal bastions, some places, public libraries will have drag queens in to read children's books to children. And in those cases, like at drag story hours, that's all they're doing. And you can find videos of these online. It's a drag queen sitting there with a group of kids, and they're just reading a kid's book to them. They're not singing, they're not dancing, they're not shaking their booty or anything else. That's what they're doing. But so there's been sort of a conflation, I think, between those things where people say, oh, there's these family-friendly drag shows, and then there's also this just sort of growing popularity of drag as a theatrical form, which has led to these national touring productions like the one that came this week. And so then, people who got upset about this, one of the things they said was, well, this is being billed as family-friendly entertainment. And that's not exactly true. Like, if you actually look at the marketing materials for this show, nothing in it says family friendly. Now, it was open to all ages, but it was not billed as a family friendly event. And the biggest audience that it was actually catering to are people who watch a very popular TV show called RuPaul's Drag Race, which is run by RuPaul, probably one of the most famous drag performers in America. And this show has been on TV for like 15 years. It's on basic cable. It's now on MTV. I think it used to be on VH1, but it's not on some porno channel or something.
Right.
And it's where drag queens come on. It's a reality TV competition show. And millions of people, literal millions of people watch this show and love it. And these tours are mostly a way to capitalize on that. And several of the drag performers, like who were at this Drag Queen Christmas show this week, were people who people know from that show. So a lot of the people who are coming out to see these touring shows are people who are, it's just like anything else where you're a fan of something on TV and then they will go on tour and you get to go see them in person. That's mostly what it is. It was open to all ages, that's true. It did have a parental discretion advisory on it, which it turned out was put on there because back in October, Knox County Mayor Glenn Jacobs and State Representative Jason Zachary apparently contacted the Tennessee Theater with concerns about this show. Somebody had seen it and flagged it for them, and they were concerned about kids being able to attend. And they asked if it could be made 18, that you had to be 18 or over, and the Tennessee Theater said they talked to the promoter, and the promoter said, no, I'm not going to make it 18 or older, but we'll put a parental advisory on it. And the Tennessee Theater said, well, we can't really change that. Like, they had a contract. It's the Tennessee Theater is a venue. They do book some of their own things, like you'll see movies and things that are actually put on by them. But a lot of what comes there is just people who they just rent the venue, and they have a rental contract for the venue. And so going back after the fact, after tickets had been on sale for more than a month, and kind of saying, oh no, now we're going to limit, do an age limitation, that would have violated the contract, so the theater couldn't make them do it. So they put that parental advisory on there after those conversations in October. And then nobody really said anything about this until about a week ago, when a guy named Ken Peters, who is pastor of a church in Lenore City called the Patriot Church, which I think is fair to describe as a Christian nationalist church. Of course, there's some debate about what that term exactly means, but mostly it means people who believe that the United States is inherently a Christian country, was founded as a Christian country, and should remain a Christian country, and should be guided and really governed by Christian principles. And, right there in the name of the Patriot Church, like they're kind of saying, like, this is who we are and this is what we believe. And they have also been the same guy, Ken Peters, has a separate or companion organization called the Church at Planned Parenthood, which for a year or so anyway, held services across the street from the Planned Parenthood facility here on Cherry Street, the one that eventually got burned down. Right. But they would meet over there and hold prayer services and, anti-abortion demonstrations and so forth. And Ken Peters is an interesting figure. He's not a local guy. He just moved to Tennessee in 2020 from Spokane, Washington, where he had actually founded a Patriot Church and a Church at Planned Parenthood, which he's still affiliated with those churches there as well. And he kind of brought that to East Tennessee. And so he put out a call a week or so ago for people, for his congregants and followers, to try to stop this drag show. He had found out about this drag show at the Tennessee Theater and thought it was terrible, that children were going to be exposed to this. And he urged people to go to county commission on Monday. I mentioned that earlier. So a good chunk of public forum, basically all of public forum that was not taken up talking about Aniya Thompson and the sheriff's office, was taken up with people mostly being angry about the drag show. There were a few people who also spoke in support of the drag show. There was actually one guy who got up to speak, Randy Cross, a local, a Knoxville native, who said he's lived in Knoxville his whole life, and he has spent, and he's gay, and he said, as a gay man growing up in East Tennessee, I spent my whole life hearing people say that gay men are pedophiles, that they're after your children, because this is one of the oldest kind of slurs and stereotypes about gay people, which, as we've said before, has no basis in data or anything. But so he kind of stood up, and he is a drag performer himself, and he stood up and said, look, I'm a drag performer. To me, it's theater. If you want to come see my show, great. If you don't want to come see my show, don't. But we're not doing anything that's going to harm anybody. And also, you should stop talking about gay people as groomers or pedophiles, because that's not true, and it is a slur, basically. But most of the people who spoke about it were against it, wanted the county to somehow stop the show. They were saying that it violated state or local adult business ordinances. Mike Moyers, who's the county deputy law director, said not really. Like, basically, there wasn't really anything that under existing statutes that the county could do about it. It's a private venue, and there was nothing in it that obviously seemed to violate, any existing adult business laws or anything.
Well, yeah, but because these are performers in costume.
Yeah.
And, every show you go to has performers in costume.
And they don't get naked. Now,
No.
They may, in the course of a dance, they may take off a gown and be wearing lingerie under it or something. But, they don't get naked, partly because they are, female impersonators.
Yes, they're not actual.
So going all the way naked, first of all, would be illegal, would be a violation of ordinances. But also it would break the illusion that the whole thing is kind of built around sustaining. And so there is no actual nudity at these shows. They can be raunchy, they can be risque. But so what happened was, obviously the show did not get canceled. The Tennessee Theater kind of came out and said, the show was here a year ago, it wasn't a problem, and it's sold out again, and people want to come see it. And, Becky Hancock, the executive director, sent an email to county commissioners where she, politely, but basically said, we don't expect everybody to like everything we book at the Tennessee Theater. Our goal is to provide a range of entertainment to appeal to many different audiences, which they do. If you look at what actually comes to the Tennessee Theater, it's a wide range of things, most of them things that I don't personally want to go to. But that's fine. It's there to be a theater sort of to serve all the interests in the community. And she said to county commissioners, if people don't like this, they should just not buy a ticket. That's the best way to kind of, nobody is forcing anybody to go to this, much less forcing anybody to take their children. So there were protests. I went down to kind of cover them and see what happened. And it was basically, maybe a couple hundred people on each side. Across the street from the Tennessee Theater, in front of the East Tennessee History Center, there were people from the Patriot Church, Ken Peters group. There were some other kind of right-wing groups there. There were self-identified members of the Proud Boys wearing the Proud Boy logo. You can buy Proud Boy merch, by the way. I went to the website and checked it out. So they were wearing Proud Boy, hats and hoodies and so forth. And the Proud Boys, if you're not familiar with them, I wouldn't call them a militia exactly, because they're not quite that organized, I don't think. But they tend to show up. They can be fairly aggressive. There have been multiple instances around the country where members of the Proud Boys have been charged with engaging in, physical altercations. And 4 or 5 members of the Proud Boys, including their then leader, also have been indicted for their roles in the January 6th insurrection and invasion of the Capitol. So, they're one of those groups that does have some track record of actual physical action and violence, but everybody was there was a lot of, so on the other side of the street in front of the Tennessee Theater was kind of a counter protest of people supporting the show, supporting the local LGBTQ community, and saying that, the people on the other side of the street were pretending to be concerned about children, but mostly really were just, biased against LGBTQ people and wanted them to go away or go back in the closet or whatever. And that was the upshot of it. Knoxville Mayor Aniya Thompson went to the show. She posted a selfie from inside the packed theater alongside City Councilwoman Lauren Ryder. State Representative Gloria Johnson, one of our local Democratic state reps, went to the show and posted about it, saying she had a great time. Of course, County Mayor Glenn Jacobs did not go to the show, issued a statement saying that, he did share people's concerns about it. And there is still pending a state law that may make it or try to make it illegal for anyone under 18 to attend a drag show, although it's still a little unclear exactly how they're going to define that.
Right. Yeah, and one thing that was interesting about the selfie that Mayor Kincannon took was I looked at it, and they're not the entire crowd was in the photo, but a good chunk. Mm-hmm. I don't know, and you don't know the makeup of the audience, but I couldn't identify one juvenile in the crowd within that shot. So it wasn't like this was a third grade field trip.
Right.
That didn't happen. I'm sure that if anyone who was under the age of 18 went, they probably went with a parent. They probably, were probably 16, 17 years old, not 8 or 9.
Right.
It's not.
Well, and that's, I was down there and I kept an eye on the stream of people coming into the theater, but obviously I didn't watch the whole time. So I didn't see everybody who went in. I did not see anybody who seemed obviously under 18 to me. Now, I'm not going to say that I can tell the difference between a 17-year-old and a 19-year-old, but nevertheless, I didn't see kids going in. Now, I did hear from somebody else that they saw somebody, some parents with what appeared to be their kids, but they didn't say how old they were. And I agree with you. I think if there were people under 18 there, they were much more likely teenagers than not. And, there's a good chance that there are people who watch, you can imagine a 15-year-old who watches Drag Race with her mom and they're like, this is a fun show and we want to come down and see our favorite drag queens. That is much more likely to be the kids who were there than, whatever preschoolers or whatever. But it was interesting that this whole thing was ostensibly about children there, but I didn't see any. And to the degree that there were any, there certainly weren't many. It was mostly a crowd of adults coming to see a show, just like happens, many nights a week down at the Tennessee Theater. But we will probably be talking about this more once the legislature comes back into session, because there has been a bill filed that seems like it's going to try to make it illegal for anybody under 18 to see a performance by a male or female impersonator, sort of making it seem like there's something inherently sexual just about the fact that somebody is dressed up as, another gender. That probably raises interesting First Amendment questions, among other things.
I would think so, yeah.
So we'll probably be talking about, we're probably not done. Yeah. I never really thought that we would be talking about drag queens, but
especially several weeks in a row.
Right. But we are probably not done talking about drag queens.
Probably not.
All right. You know what, Seth? I'm going to try one of these cookies. Let's take a little break here and we will come back. Well, I'm happy to report that those are delicious Christmas cookies. Thank you, Seth.
Thank you.
Yes, I thank you, and my dentist thanks you.
Setting a high bar for podcast producers, providing studio snacks. We appreciate it.
I do my best.
Okay, we are to the Q&A portion of the podcast, where we invite questions from our readers on our subscriber-only Facebook page, the Compass Colloquy. Every week, we ask people if there's anything on their mind they'd like to hear talked about that may not be, immediate pressing news. And we got a couple interesting questions this week having to do with housing. A reader asked, First of all, why are we not seeing much, if any, new development in the Fountain City area specifically? And then secondly, is there any effort, or should there be any effort by the City of Knoxville to try to encourage, subsidize, or otherwise facilitate the construction of what is called the missing middle housing, which is a term that people in housing circles use that really refers to, you also, there's some overlap with things like workforce housing. It's basically affordable housing, not in the sense of subsidized affordable housing, but in the sense of housing that people with sort of like average salaries can actually afford. So let's take the first part of this first. Why are we not seeing much, if any, development activity in Fountain City?
Well, it's because Fountain City is already pretty much built out. You go, you look, you can do this on Google, or you can do it, the KGIS website, which is a wonderful resource. You look at the map, draw back to encompass all of Fountain City, and about the only open space are the two large cemeteries in Fountain City. I mean, and you can't say that they're not developed.
And those are pretty occupied too.
Yeah, those are developed. But I mean, as there just aren't any large parcels. There might be a lot here and there, but as far as some place where you could go in and build 10 or 12 houses, which would be a small subdivision anyway, that's not there.
Right.
And that's the main reason. Now, right outside of Fountain City, at Shenandoah Road, which the city portion of Fountain City ends there, and the county portion begins, but it's all pretty much Fountain City. There was a proposal for an apartment building in there at the corner of Shenandoah and Tazewell Pike, and it drew huge opposition, and that's one of the other reasons is Fountain City Town Hall is a very vocal, well-connected group that zealously argues for what they consider to be good development, and basically if there's a big project, they'll probably be at least questioning it, if not opposing it.
Right, because of its potential impact on roads and traffic and kind of all of those issues. And Fountain City Town Hall is one of those residents groups, homeowners groups that really protects. Fountain City is mostly built out, and it's mostly built out as single-family housing throughout Fountain City. There are some apartments here and there, but mostly it's single-family housing. And Fountain City Town Hall very strongly defends that particular, kind of current configuration of development in Fountain City. And there's an interesting intersection there, I think, with this question about missing middle housing too. And so one interesting thing that happened this week is actually Knox County Planning issued a report on missing middle housing, which we will probably be writing about here in the near future. But it makes some recommendations about how what we call missing middle housing can be pursued. And those mostly have to do with bringing more density into to all sorts of areas, but including into established neighborhoods. And the way that you would do that is when you have, say, open lots, or maybe a house, has fallen into disrepair in an existing neighborhood and has been knocked down, so you can build new on the lot, that instead of just adhering to that single-family housing template, you go in and do a duplex or a fourplex, or there's these things called sort of courtyard developments where you kind of build several smaller, usually rental units on a lot around a central kind of courtyard area. And those are ways that you can bring more affordable and denser housing into some of these existing neighborhoods. But those also tend to be pretty controversial with neighborhood associations.
Yeah, again, it goes back to these areas that have a lot of single-family homes. One of the neighborhood associations that that represent them, that represent their interests. One of the key things is they want to preserve their property values, and there is a perception out there that if you allow greater density, it's going to lower your property values. I don't know that there's any data that supports that, but yeah, and one thing that is happening, the city in revamping its code a couple of years ago allows more duplexes in single family neighborhoods, and you can get those use on review, which means you have a proposal, planning commission reviews it, they can approve the use. And it seems, I haven't done an analysis of it, but it seems like those are being proposed and built more frequently than they used to be. It's not like there's tomorrow half of Knoxville is not going to be covered up with duplexes, but that they are more common.
Well, because again, in areas that are already developed, to do that, you need to have an open lot. And not many people are going to buy an existing single-family house that's in good shape and knock it down just so they can build a duplex. It's more often going to be those properties that are, dilapidated and do get knocked down. And there's some number of those that happen every year.
Yeah.
And so we're more likely to say, at least within these established city neighborhoods like Fountain City, to the degree we see any of this at all, it's going to be sort of piecemeal and, a case-by-case basis rather than somebody coming in, saying, I'm going to build 200 duplexes. If that kind of thing happens, it's much more likely to happen outside the city. And there is discussion in the advanced Knox process about also allowing a greater diversity of housing types within residential developments, and that you could, we talked just the other week about this new big Belltown development up in North Knox County, which is going to have a lot of single-family housing, but it's also going to have some apartments, and it's going to have some other forms, of housing with higher density, and those forms will tend to be more affordable, and that is kind of what that missing middle phrase is really talking about.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that that came out through the revamping of the city's code and is coming up in advanced Knox too. With the growth that is anticipated, the number of people who they estimate will be moving here, there's no way around building with higher density, and
at least in some areas.
In some areas, not in all, but that's one of the reasons we're getting the big apartment complexes along Cumberland Avenue, because it's encouraged along Cumberland Avenue to have larger, more dense developments, and by doing so, it frees up other housing in the community, and but it really is vital. When you talk to planners, they say it's vital that that we build at higher densities than we have been, if we want to accommodate the number of people who will want to live here.
Right, because just sort of like endless single-family housing, 3 units an acre or whatever, depending on the zone that you're in, is basically a recipe for more of what we have, which is just kind of like sprawl and sprawl and sprawl and sprawl, spreading farther and farther out, which makes it harder and harder to provide, public services to all of those areas. And also from the government standpoint, the property tax standpoint, they get a much bigger bang for their buck with dense housing, because a 40-unit apartment complex on a lot generates a lot more property tax than, a single house or a couple of houses on that same lot.
Right.
So that's what we know about that. And as I said, we will probably be following up on that missing middle report that just came out this week. All right, looking ahead to next week, we have not a lot. Nothing. It's the last week of the year. It's the dead week between Christmas and New Year's. We are not anticipating, there's no public meetings scheduled. Yeah. We are not anticipating any big news events, although, of course, last year, for example, Planned Parenthood was burned down by an arsonist on December 31st. So breaking news can always happen. If breaking news happens, we will certainly talk about it. But the main thing we are going to be doing next week for our subscribers, you can read these. We will be doing our annual year in review stories where we look back kind of at the areas we cover, the city, the county, school system, UT, and just kind of talk about what were the major issues, kind of what were the themes of the year in some ways. I always find these interesting to look back through. One thing that I always find when you go back and look all the way through the whole year is, a lot happens in a year. Like you find things that happened, in May and you're like, oh, was that this year too? And so we will be kind of boiling all of that down for you. And then we will come back here next week and probably mostly talk about kind of the 2022, the big picture. What happened? What didn't happen? What did we learn? What are the questions that we have heading into 2023? We will talk about all of those things. If you are a listener and you have questions about or thoughts about what happened this past year or what you're hoping or fearing might happen next year, you can drop us a line at info@compassknox.com. And I think that'll wrap us up for the week. I'm going to get back to my eggnog here. Our theme music is by Will Wright, and our production, as always, is by Lord Seth Barber of Barbarian Studios and purveyor of fine Christmas cookies.
I have to be fair; those are my wife's family recipe. I don't get to claim full credit on that.
Well, please,
although I did give them to
thanks. Ho ho ho!
Ho ho ho! We hope everybody out there has a great Christmas.
you, and God bless us, everyone. Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.